Let's take a look at some information and charts on ZRX for Brave New Coin. So ZRX is a DEX protocol, liquidity aggregator, kind of DeFi before DeFi existed. Very early in the ICO DEX game, one of the earliest protocols for DEXs. There were several early DEXs that adopted ZRX code and then ended up forking off. I don't hear too much about those anymore. I'm sure they still exist in some form. But the question was always, why does the token exist for ZRX? And I think we're still at that point in the game. Why do tokens exist for most things, but specifically ZRX? Now they've added use cases onto it, added a staking component loosely that I don't think too many people take seriously, but it's there. Should people want it, we'll get to that. There's a governance component, but the real shining jewel in the ZRX crown is Matcha, the main exchange where most people are probably going to encounter ZRX these days. So in the end, it wasn't really external actors coming in using the ZRX code, because I believe Matcha is one of ZRX's babies. So it's their exchange essentially. And as you have more DEXs in more protocols, lending, borrowing, you need aggregators, really, finding the best price, lowest fees. And ZRX and Matcha attempt to do that. This isn't an ad for them. It's just, this is the use case, right? This is the use case for most of crypto is speculation. Look at NFTs and look at the OpenSea volume exploding right now. Now we can look at volumes on ZRX over the past year. They kind of peaked in May. And if we look all time, the volume was basically nothing until DeFi really took off. So again, ZRX was kind of DeFi before DeFi was a thing. So the table was set and they were ready. They built a bit of an empty cathedral at that time. The interoperability maybe wasn't as robust as it is now, where you can just plug and play MetaMask into anything or a hardware wallet into anything. So they've benefited greatly from that on the volume side of things. But it remains to be seen if this is going to be a flash in the pan, one and done thing, if this is going to have some legs over time. They've released various protocols that are catching on. And active traders, it looks like for the most part, this just keeps increasing. So that's certainly healthy for a DEX aggregator, DEX protocol, to see increasing numbers like that. If you look at tokens on the DEX or tokens traded through ZRX, it's the usual suspects. ETH-BTC, a bunch of stable coins, a few scams in here. Link's always at the top for some reason. And then the bigger stuff, lending and borrowing stuff, other DEX tokens, that sort of thing. So nothing too out of the ordinary on that front. This is Matcha, and it's stupid simple for anybody to use, especially if you're not native to trading or have any experience trading. You can swap between anything you want. You can even get tokens you can't get as an American or whatever your regulatory jurisdiction may be on centralized exchanges. We'll see how long this lasts. But if you want to buy things, not investment advice, if you want to buy things that maybe aren't available to you in other ways, DEXs are one way to do that. Matcha is one way to do that. They even have limit orders on certain pairs, something that's a newer innovation for DEXs. So Matcha is great, works great. Here's the staking component of ZRX. I couldn't even get the pools to load, but in general, you aren't buying ZRX because of the staking rewards, most likely, if I had to guess. They are small, they are based on trading fees, rewarded in ETH, so there's a benefit there. You don't have to worry about the ZRX volatility as much, or the ZRX being a non-factor, And I don't want to make it sound like I'm bearish on the people of ZRX or the protocol. It's just forever and always the token hasn't really made too much sense. Protocol's great, works great. This is their governance roadmap. And the goal here is to eventually shift responsibility onto the community, which is interesting. It kind of reminds me of, the differences between like Charlie Lee and Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi left in a shroud, right? A veil of mystery, never to be seen again. Kind of for the better, whereas Charlie Lee's kind of attached to Litecoin forever, even though he sold his coins years ago. And we see serial project creators like Dan Larimer just rotate from project to project to project. And there's kind of no in between when do I cash out and bro down, basically, versus do I really believe in this thing? So it's hard not to be cynical to see stuff like this when the team that gained all of the monetary rewards from the token is saying we're going to just, we want to go fully decentralized. That's the kicker. That's the framing of it all. So yes, that's great, but it's not like the community's benefiting from the token sale, right? So always keep that in mind. There are other tokens like this that try to do the same thing. ADA is one that comes to mind. So yes, we want decentralization, but we don't want the people at the top basically just passing the bag on to somebody else after they cash out, So I think it's hard to toe that line. And ideally, they go on to explain what the DAO is here, but ideally the DAO and funding and all that stuff is funded by the ICO, right? So we'll see what happens when it happens. But I'm always less optimistic of people leaving after they've raised a bunch of money. They did create a product. It works. I get it. But at what point, how long do people have to stay on a project before we lose that feeling? Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm too cynical. I don't know. But you get these people who basically do their ICO, have a vision, don't actually execute, and then just leave. EOS comes to mind with Dan Larimer, where you sort of do a good enough job so it looks like you did an attempt, and then you just leave with your bag of money, I don't think that's the case for ZRX, but it's something to be considerate about and consider. Here's the governance stuff. Again, most people, unless you're deeply involved in governance for anything, it's not that big of a deal. And if you ever disagree with governance components, you can always fork off, which is, again, what a bunch of early exchanges did. I don't know if they necessarily exist anymore, but a lot of those exchanges also sort of raise their own ICO and probably don't exist anymore. That's another problem. And if we're talking about DEXs, we got to talk about volume. We can look at all the DEXs on ETH, look at volumes. Uni is consistently 50% plus of the volume. Some of this volume is double or triple counted, so you've got to keep that in mind. Here's ZRX in the orange slice, Matcha here in the reddish slice. So not a giant proportion of volume on any given day. That's barely noticeable in the green slice here relative to Uni. Now ZRX doesn't have or Matcha doesn't have a native token, doesn't have AMM type of stuff. It's more of a direct centralized exchange competitor in my mind. So they definitely lose out on volume from that perspective. And if we look at DEX by month in the yellow down there, not a lot on any given day. But again, they're kind of different than the Unis and the Sushis of the world. So it's hard to compare those one-to-one. But as with any exchange, you want to see volumes picking up. If you look at transaction counts and the line here of the token itself, kind of trending to zero, it's really never had robust transactional on-chain activity, nor should you expect it to. It's basically a buy and hold. If you think it's going up, there's not really much else to do with it. You can stake with it, and that's kind of it. You can use it in lending and borrowing protocols, which I'll get to in a second, but there isn't really anything to do with this token. Again, this is a perpetual issue with ZRX. It was kind of just a raise, and I'm happy the people who coded this, created this, got paid and continue to get paid and did various different ways. But, as a speculator, I'm not holding this other than trading it, right? Transaction values just kind of rising and falling with price here. Active addresses also trending to zero. This wasn't an airdrop. This wasn't the flavor of the month, flavor of the year, DEX coins. So it's going to have issues, I think, competing with those. And NVT is rising again as transactions are falling, active addresses are falling. So certainly not bullish from that perspective. We can also look at MVRV in the fill here. MVRV is a measure of market cap versus on-chain activity. Generally a 2x multiple is where the market says, okay, it's probably overbought at this point in time, meaning the market cap is 2 times on-chain activity. In ZRX's case, it's basically topped out at 1.7 and 1.3. So on any future highs or higher highs, I would look to this. Is it above 1.3? Is it above 1.7? That's a good sanity check for, is this thing too overbought at this point in time? Currently, MVRV is sub 0.7, and historically the lows have been sub 0.4, like the ultimate bear market lows. So this isn't like a screaming buy based on MVRV at this level, and it's definitely not a sell. It says there's some upside left after falling considerably from 1.3. And if we look at all of the lending and borrowing protocols, this is comp, and here's ZRX, pretty big total supply here at 120 million. Less so on Maker, smaller pool there, and less so on Aave as well. And so long as stuff like ZRX is listed as collateral, right? Like there's additional use cases, sort of exogenous use cases for this thing to exist. Now it could get delisted from Aave and kept on comp, for whatever reason, but I wouldn't expect the coin to just disappear if it's ingrained everywhere else. That's enough fundamentals. Let's talk about technicals. We have the 5200 EMA, yearly pivots here, VP, VR, RSI, and volume at the bottom. And ZRX has had an interesting journey from a multi-month consolidation breakdown along with Bitcoin in 2018 to then a multi-month consolidation, multi-year consolidation really, from 2019 to 2021. Several support resist flips, tons of volume at the 25 to 30 cent level, and finally everything took off in January with DeFi and then fell with DeFi. And right now it looks like every other DeFi chart in that it has this double bottom, inverted head and shoulders, mean reversion stuff playing out. It bounced at the previous kind of support resist level at around 60 cents. Also had a bullish divergence at the bottom along with everything else, which alone isn't enough to save anything, but it does add to your, should I buy this knife? Should I buy this low case? So things moving along nicely. The next step would be to watch for a 5200 cross on the EMAs. If you look on the daily cloud, I said on Twitter, this is the most textbook edge-to-edge setup you could see. This is exactly what you're looking for. So especially the new people who are learning cloud stuff, for me personally, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a candle close inside the cloud. I'm looking for a confluent TK cross, this blue red line here, which means a bullish TK cross. I'm looking for a thick cloud or a large cloud to show that there's pretty significant upside here to 150. So that's where your take profit is, and your stop loss is at the bottom of the cloud or the Kijun at 77 cents or thereabouts. And this would trigger a long trade at this point. So I would either buy here or open a little bit here and then add anything lower down to 77 cents. And with the expectation that this thing retraces to 150. That's certainly not based on fundamentals. It's based on purely technicals, and it's based on every other DeFi chart looking like this. So it's unlikely that this thing moves by itself, but it certainly helps that everything looks extremely similar. And all this is a mean reversion trade to a 50% retracement. So from this high to this low, this is the 50% level. And the edge to edge is basically a confirmation that, yeah, this low is going to hold and is probably going to retrace to that level. Now you could have told yourself, okay, well, we had this inverted head and shoulders and double bottom. I could have went long here technically, but this is just additional confluence that this thing is probably going to 150. And you can also look at the 12-hour if you wanted to cheat this a little bit. The 12-hour Kumo breakout, bullish cloud. And if you're waiting for the entire cloud setup to turn bullish on the 12-hour, you're waiting for this lagging span to be out of the cloud. But generally, this setup, I don't really pay attention to the lagging span too much. So as long as we have a bullish Kumo breakout, bullish TK cross, and bullish cloud, that's enough for me to say, okay, this thing is longable at this point in time. And you get your target on the daily cloud, your entry on the 12-hour if you want, if you're not comfortable with waiting for that candle close in the cloud. And stop loss here is the same, 77 cents, whatever the Kijun is at that point in time. And it acts as a trailing stop because it'll move up over time. ZRX-BTC has had a history of bullish divergences at this level. W's, knife stabs, whatever you want to call it. In general, it's ranged from 2,000 to 4,000 sats and isn't anything I'd want to be trading at this point in time. It just doesn't have a history of holding on to any highs. And there's no real reason fundamentally to hold this over BTC. There's no real reason to hold this technically until it's above 4,000 sats, basically above the range. So unless you're buying lows and just trading the range, there's kind of no reason to touch this for me here, even with a bullish divergence. Now this may spike back up to 4K, but you're also risking basically all-time lows, just sliding lower. So I don't hate a range trade here from the lows, but it's just not for me. I'd much rather trade bullish trend than a range trade at lows. This ZRX ETH chart, though, looks a lot like mini ETH charts in that you have a multi-month, multi-week bullish divergence with this scooping low. So this could end up double bottoming. There's even a dating back to January bullish divergence in that you have a series of lower lows with higher RSI, and you have these most recent lows with higher RSI. So I definitely like this trade setup more than the BTC trade setup. And at minimum, I'd probably expect a 2x from this with potential 3x to 001. Anything after that's a bonus. So fundamentally, protocol's great. Token probably doesn't need to exist, never really needed to exist. It is certainly deeply ingrained in DeFi at this point in time and available on every lending and borrowing protocol. Technicals on the USD pair look good for a 50 to 60% move. BTC pair looks muted in a range, and the ETH pair looks ready for a potential 2 to 3x as well. So if you think DeFi is ready to pop off, you're rotating out of BTC and ETH and into DeFi. And that's just one way to play the rotation game. Lastly, I'll just mention the ETH and BTC fund along with the DeFi portfolio. I trade for Techemy Capital on Enzyme.finance, non-custodial portfolio management tool where you can send ETH or USDC or just watch what I'm doing. You can see AUM, performance, allocation, all the trades in mischief I get up to on the yield plays. You can see how much and when I'm trading for what. You can see all the deposits and withdrawals going on both of these as well. So that's all I have for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.